Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under flashback series. We're very nearly at the end of this series now. We're up to episode 19, talking the first half of the 2019-2020 season, which saw Grant McCann appointed as City manager. And we'll talk about the second half of that season a little bit later on. Another episode. Don't worry about that too much. But with me to discuss this season, I've got Brad. How are you, Brad?
Good, mate. Good. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Unfortunately, I think for anyone listening along on YouTube, normally for these episodes, we have audio from sort of famous or well-received goals from that season. I think the audio might have cut out a little bit there. It was, of course, the Tom Eaves masterclass of a goal, really robbed of a Puskás nomination for that third goal against Fulham. I don't know if you remember it, Brad. It was the one where I think he basically tripped over his own feet and just happened to get a little bit on the ball and it trickled into the back of the net.
An accidental shot.
Absolutely. So, one of the highlights of that first half of the season, and as it would turn out, one of the few highlights of the season in general. But look, we'll start things off, obviously, the way that season started. So if we cast our minds back, Nigel Adkins, I think the previous season, had basically fagged that he wasn't interested in renewing his contract. And as such, we took Grant McCann off, must have been off Peterborough, I think, or I think he might have been sacked by Peterborough in the off season and was appointed our manager. And it's sort of easy to forget now, I guess, with everything that went with it after that. But I remember at the time actually being pretty excited that we'd got this, young up and coming manager. It was, it wasn't just another, no disrespect to Adkins, who actually did a good job, but it wasn't just another, manager off the merry-go-round. It was actually something a little bit different. And I don't know, what were your thoughts at the time of McCann's appointment?
Well, it was definitely, he was at Doncaster.
That's
but
right.
I don't remember what his, credentials were as far as where they finished and so on. But I remember at the time thinking he's the perfect man for the job.
Yeah.
Because he's got wherever they did finish, Doncaster, I think he built them up quite a bit, like basically from not much money and basically developed the players and so on, like from within. So you sort of thought, okay, we knew we were going to lose some players after the previous season. He could be the man to sort of almost like rebuild from within. But obviously, didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, you're right. I had it the wrong way around, because he's had probably one of the, other than Darren Ferguson, who I think sort of clearly job shares the Peterborough job with him, he's had one of the funnier managerial progressions in his history, because he actually started off at Peterborough, left Peterborough for Doncaster. Doncaster he left for us, then went back to Peterborough, and now back to Doncaster. So it's like he's doing sort of a slight. So probably he'll be Ruben Sayas's successor at City at the rate his career seems to go. But no, you're right. So he was at Doncaster before us. I think he must have made. I'm just having a look. So I think he made the playoffs for them. They lost to Charlton in the semi-final, and we actually poached him from Doncaster at that point because. Yeah, you're right. Like he came in basically with that reputation of being able to build the squad, had a clear playing style. And I just remember those first few games of the season. I think might have even been Swansea first game of the season where I want to say we went up 1-0 early in that game. I might be misremembering. And I think we ended up losing the game, but it was just sort of a result of, our legs weren't up to it in the second half. And I remember just thinking, I'm just having a look at the score now. So Batty scored after 3 minutes, and then they scored in the 47th and 49th. And I just remember thinking, his style was clearly quite high energy, high tempo, and that once the players' fitnesses were up to his standards, it would actually start to get some pretty decent results out of it. But I thought it was a reasonably exciting appointment at the time.
Yeah, and look, I think, again, I'm getting older, so my memory's not as good. But I think I sort of felt like, well, okay, he's coming to a club that's going to grow with him because he's going to get a bit more money to play with, and he's going to have a bit of a playing budget. And it was almost like a proper step up, but that sort of suited where I thought we were. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the other one before we can talk player movements in a second. The other one that sort of surprised me that off season is like my memory was when Adkins left the club. Grzycki and Bowen doing their laps of honours, saying farewell on the final game of the season. And I just remember thinking, like, that's it. They're going to be off in the summer. We'll get a good fee for Bowen and be able to reinvest that. And as the weeks went by and he was still at the club, I thought, oh, there's actually a sneaky chance we kind of keep hold of him for this season. And sure enough, we did get another 6 months out of him. But I just remember at the time being convinced that he was off that summer, and somehow he didn't.
Look, agree, mate. In the end, it was a good piece of business not to let him go then, just from a financials. But yeah, I mean, the writing was on the wall. Anyone knew that he was, if not our best player, close to it, and he was young and upcoming, and everyone would have been looking at him. So yeah, for once we didn't actually just take cash and run. And it'd be interesting to see. I don't know who Bowen's agent is, but when you look at the decisions they've made and when they've actually made them, he's obviously managed pretty well.
I mean, his stats for that season are just simply ridiculous. He made 29 appearances in the championship that season for us and scored 16 goals. So you just have to think, if he'd stayed for the full season, he was on track for 30 plus goals, which as a winger in the sort of side that we were at that time, it's just like, carried is almost an understatement for what we were with him that season. That between him and Grzycki, we were just absolutely, as was shown to be the case in that second half of the season, we were just absolutely nothing once they left. It was quite crazy.
Yeah, and especially considering and over all the years of following the Tigers, you've always got this whole, where's our goal scorers coming from and all this. And here we are with basically, pretty much two leading championship scorers, and yet we're still sitting where we were. So
it's a great point, because it's, you think outside of Bowen, really, I can't think of many seasons supporting City where we've gone into games almost just expecting a player to score and just being, having that confidence that they will, the other team has to score 2 goals to beat us, because, we know that Bowen's going to get on the score sheet, or Grzycki's going to get on the score sheet, or what might happen between the two of them.
And it probably shows you, especially in a team at the time that was maybe struggling to find its feet properly, just how good he was.
No doubt. Well, we'll chat first of all about departures, because there wasn't, as has become almost common practice these days under Arjun, so it was at that time, where we basically saw an almost entirely new squad come in, because we did see a number of departures, with Evandro released, Will Keane released, Mazook released, Ridgewell released, James Weir released, Marshall released, and Campbell released. And I guess the common trend there being that we just weren't getting fees out of players. You sort of think, for all the faults in the current administration's transfer policies in terms of signing 20 players a window and selling 10 of them the next window, at least by and large, we're able to recover fees for a number of the players. Whereas at this time, when you think of Evandro, had his injury issues. Will Keane, I guess, sort of was in and out of the side as well. But you think Keane's kind of gone on to have a reasonable career. Marshall, I think, left us for Wigan. A few of those sorts of players where you think, if things have been managed a little bit better, we should have been able to get some fees, or we should have either been able to re-sign these players to contracts. But it just seemed the way of the club at the time that you'd sign a player on a 3-year deal, and you just knew that after 3 years they'd be gone on a free deal, really. And you got the 3 years out of them. They wouldn't re-sign the contract. You wouldn't get a fee for them, and that was just sort of it.
Yeah, it is a bit weird, especially with a couple of names on there, because, look, let's face it, whether he's got talent or not, at the time, Will Keane was no one's favourite, and so you didn't expect anyone to come rolling in and splashing cash. But even Campbell, okay, he was not certainly at his best, but he was worth something as a striker, running around in even Championship or League One. Even now, League Two teams would be happy to pay a transfer fee for a player like him. And you're right, it was almost like we just were happy to let contracts expire. So the only thing I can think of, mate, is that literally the wage bill just became such a concern that you just had to cut and run, because, I don't know what Will Keane was on, but at the time, the pedigree on some of these players, and especially I think Will Keane did pretty well when he ended up at Wigan anyway. you would have expected at some stage to be getting something for them. Even if it's only sort of 50 grand, it's still something. But obviously the wage bill was just too high.
Yeah, and just looking, so Campbell had scored 12 goals the season before for us, and you just sort of think, surely at that point, you've either got the year extension where you trigger that and sell him for, like you say, 500,000, a million sort of thing. 12 goals in the championship's a good return. To manage his contract in such a way that we're getting nothing off the back of a season like that is pretty disappointing. The other one actually who left that the name just completely kind of left my head was Tom Powell. I don't actually know where he ended up, but he was, of course, signed under Bruce as sort of that wonder kid from United. And then I don't know what's happened to his career. It's just completely fallen off a cliff. But quite a few of the outgoings, and sort of a similar story to this summer, I suppose, that we then had to replace them with a number of new players. And it was a complete changing of the guard, outside of Bowen and Grzycki, really. And I almost think the most remarkable thing about this is Sean McLaughlin, of course, pictured here, still with the club, still starting games, which is a massive credit to him. But, alongside George Honeyman, Tom Eaves, Callum Elder, Matt Ingram, of course, also joined that summer. Who else have we got? Lopez, who did seem to be one of those rare cases where we were able to, make a profit on a player. Josh Magennis joined as well. So it was a real turnover in the squad. And what happened that season went on to happen, but they actually formed, a core of, the heroes of that League One season, George Honeyman in particular, Callum Elder making the team of that League One season, Magennis and Eaves with reasonable goal returns as well. It was, 12 months out, but it was actually sort of planting the seeds for a reasonable resurgence for the club.
Mate, and I suppose the only thing that repeats itself on that is when you have that sort of turnover, unfortunately, it always ends up being something that backfires because, even the names you've just rattled off there, you're talking about 8 to 9 guys you're bringing in that you expect to be in your first team. It doesn't say a lot for the ones that were already there the year before and have grown. And I think that's probably part of where the problem started.
Yeah. And not trying to be too unkind to the group of players, but I suppose we were almost unintentionally building a League One winning squad whilst already in the championship. So you build.
I didn't want to say it. Yeah. Especially, you look at Honeyman without going into the following season. What a superstar he was in that promotion season to get us back out of League One. And but you look at that list. You look through all of those guys that were brought in, they're all decent players. There's none of them in there that we didn't sign anyone that was basically a muppet. It's just the fact that you're almost trying to replace your whole starting 11 with all these signings. And maybe that's, the manager wanting to put a flavour on things, but I think part of it as well because you had to release a few because of those wages.
Yeah. And I will say, as much as we sort of downplay the ability potentially of some of these players, I look at Callum Elder there on that screen and I can't help but think with the troubles that we've had at left back over the last few years, I dare say he would still be our starting left back if he was still at the club.
Absolutely, mate. Don't get me started on that. I think probably the thing that if we go back, not to go back over decades, but look at the promotion seasons when we, got to playoff finals and got into the Premier League and so on, or even that League One season, the one thing we had was a fairly settled lineup.
Yeah.
And then if you sort of put them in column A saying, yep, settled lineups, or column B, unsettled lineups, I'd love to see that pretty much every relegated season or bottom 3, bottom 5 type season, I would doubt very much it's when we had a settled lineup.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter what division you're in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting. It's interesting. I was going to say as well, the other call out, not really an incoming for the club, but a player from the academy making his debut that season and managing 2 goals as well. I actually forgot he'd scored in the championship for us that season. Was, of course, Keane Lewis Potter. So you sort of kind of forget that there's that crossover between Lewis Potter and Bowen. But, I guess I'd say, along with Jacob Greaves, who will appear on this next slide if I flip to it, I had to include, because this is the players that we Greaves we loaned out that season to Cheltenham, but then we loaned in Josh Bowler and Matthew Pennington from Everton. But Greaves, along with Lewis Potter, probably the last two big academy graduates that we've had at this stage. You start, talking about, planting the seeds for that League One season, but also just planting the seeds for, these Premier League stars really that are, sort of emerging out of the City team. It's such a funny season to look back on because, obviously an atrocious end to the season, I think worst end to a championship season in history, but there are some real sort of positive aspects to it as well, just in terms of you look at the previous few seasons under the Allams where we treaded water and we brought in a lot of those older guys and didn't really do much. But as we started this episode saying, like, McCann coming in did have that ability to turn the squad over, find a few sort of elements of talent, clearly identified Greaves as one, and sending him out for a senior loan, but really sort of set the club on its way.
Yeah, you've made exactly right. I mean, think of the last time a manager got relegated, kept his job, and turned things around. And to be fair to him, I think probably, and we might even have a lot more to thank him for than we actually think, is that really that turnover of player from, let's say, the Campbells or the Marshalls or even Evandro, older players. And yet, other than, say, when Honeyman came in, everything that was sort of in the signings pocket, if you like, of that season, they were all up-and-coming or younger players. I mean, even like we mentioned with Tom Eaves, okay, no one really warmed to him, let's say. But you got to remember, like, at the time we signed him, there was a chance, anyway, that he was going to be this young, up-and-coming striker who could be like the James Vardy type, who comes up through League Two into League One and shows everyone he can score goals in every league he goes to. So you're not going to get them all right. But I do rate what you said there, that even some of the loan signings with Bowler and so on, everything had a bit of a, let's call it a 5-year feel to it.
Yeah.
Not just this season. So perhaps, getting relegated, being able to adjust wages, get the club on a good footing at the same time as retain the youth, set us in good stead for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and it's exactly right what you said about Eaves. I have this memory when he came to the club that there was some stat about the number of goals he'd scored for Gillingham over the last couple of years being, I don't know, second or third most in the entire football league. And thinking, we're getting this quite prolific striker, and yes, it's a step up from, yes, it's a higher level, but if he can replicate that, he could be that sort of missing piece along with Bowen and Grzycki. But yeah, for whatever reason, it didn't quite work out for him at the club. Magennis, probably another one who's in that sort of older bracket. So I think we kind of went a bit experienced with the strikers. But you're right, when you're looking at, Lopez and Honeyman in midfield, Batty, I guess, getting his breakthrough as well, relatively young defence as well. There was just a lot of opportunity. Matt Ingram coming in. My memory is he was coming in sort of as the understudy for George Long at the time, but as we've seen, he made close to 100 appearances for City as well. There's just a lot of names in that squad that really did form the backbone of the years to come. I guess the other one was Nua Dicko went out on loan to Vitesse Arnhem that season. I think he was basically the last of that old guard, where you sort of think, that transfer strategy of signing players if they've scored against us the previous week. There was a string of them because we signed Irvine, we signed Dicko. I think there was another one as well where it didn't seem a very nuanced strategy, but fair play to the club, I suppose.
Oh, it's funny. I still remember bugger. I just saw it. I can see his face. Peter Halmosi.
Oh yes, yeah. He was one.
Scores against us. Looks great. I think was he at Plymouth or Portsmouth? One of the two. Scores a good goal against us, and then basically, we're in love with him now. We've got to sign him and put him on good coin. And I think the poor bugger sat on the bench for about 26 games. But it's funny how they just sit in managers' heads. And in fact, it was more like you look at Robertson ending up at Liverpool.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. Robertson played a blinder against them. And you would have thought that, so it all happens. We just have a habit of getting the ones that fail.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, actually, the only one I can think that worked was Harry Maguire for Sheffield United in the Cup semi-final. I have a memory of Bruce saying that sort of inspired that signing, and that clearly worked out quite well for us. But that's probably the only one I can think of that was a success. One I wouldn't mind would be Victor Johansson from Stoke, with the way that he plays every time we seem to play them. Just sign him and
Yes.
stick him on the bench just so he can't pull out blinders every time we
Yeah,
play.
that's right. Just to negate him against us would be good.
That's right. Well, we'll wrap things up. We'll talk some of the games from that first half of the season. I mean, I sort of touched on the Swansea game, first game of the season. I think the highlight for me has to be that Fulham 3-0 away win. Fulham went on to get promoted. I think they came fourth that season. And I think all three of our goals were real clear kind of counter-attacking goals. I think we had 30% possession or whatever it might have been. But up to the basically the end of the first half of the season, we had 10 wins and we're sitting 8th or 9th in the table, I think, and really heading into January, looking a genuine chance of at least making the playoffs. I mean, it's so easy to use hindsight and look at what happened that second half of the season, but I really, like, my memory is like if we'd gone into that January window and handled it better, we could have given the top six a real shake.
Oh, look, definitely, mate. And if you think about just leading up to that point, not only we were starting to click, but you're thinking, right, with the window coming up, we may have a chance here to, just sharpen what we're doing a little, even though obviously we all thought that Bowen would go. But, yeah, it's the frustrating thing about City, isn't it? When we're going all right and we think, oh, do you know what, let's take a step up, we tend to take 3 back.
Yeah, because I'm looking at like the transfer business. Even before Bowen and Grzycki left, we signed Martin Samuelson, who basically from West Ham middle of the month, and we brought in Herbie Kane and Malik Wilkes on loan. And Wilkes, another one of those you'd probably put in that category of young players who went on to be quite good in League One. But you just sort of can't help but think if we'd done a little bit better with that business earlier on, because I can't help but think, I think we lost 2 or 3 games in a row in January, and that probably triggered the Allams to say, well, we're not going to make the playoffs. Let's cash in on Bowen and Grzycki. We're probably safe from relegation. Little did they know. But you can't help but think if we'd had a little bit of luck in January and had a few better performances, things could have been a bit different. But we'll talk second half of the season in the next episode. But I mean, you've already said, the memory is probably failing you a little bit, so probably testing you a bit to ask for any sort of standout memories from that first half of the season. But does anything stick in your mind in terms of games or moments?
Look, probably the only thing I thought of back then, of course, was like with Eves basically coming in. I was one of those ones that thought, right, he's a big lad. He's exactly what we need. And so you just sort of felt like we were going to be this all-out attacking goal-scoring squad. And it was actually just showed you, I mean, the amount of times Bowen would cut in from the wing and score, it was like it all had to come down to him. And I think probably the only thing about that first half of the season is we thought we were flying along nicely. And, wow, a couple of little tweaks here, and we are really, let's say, playoff contention. And so, I mean, there was a lot of optimism there, but I suppose, as a supporter, the club's built on false hope, mate. It has been for a long time, so we should have known something was only around the corner.
Yeah.
But I actually thought at that stage maybe the Allams had just, I don't know, warmed us to the point of saying, right, they're listening to us now. Was that the year we changed logos?
Might have been, yeah, because that was looking at these photos, because that must be the first year that we've adopted the one we've got now, which has Hull City on the crest, 1904. Because I know they did the whole fan consultation, they got it changed, and you thought, oh, okay, yeah, maybe the tide's turning.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just my opinion. When you have a big change like that, and then obviously there was the removal of the stripes on the kit and changing a few things around, I just sort of thought like, okay, at the start of the season, all right, new era, here we go. But by the end of that season, obviously you're still feeling like the same ownership and the same thought processes there. We just got pants pulled down by the owners for a little while, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to say the only other standout I've got from that first half of the season, if you remember, was the Forest game where we held on to win 2-1 despite Magennis getting sent off. And probably the moment from that game that sticks out the most is Nobby Balog, the 6 foot whatever striker.
Yeah,
I think he came on for the last 5 minutes or so and just kept going down with fake injuries to just waste time, and the Forest crowd just getting absolutely furious with him. That sort of sticks in my mind as well as probably the more hilarious moment from that season.
Yeah. Oh, actually, there's one there. I mean, was that the year that we changed the away kit was back to the white, all white, nice one again.
I think so. Yeah.
I think, didn't we play?
Oh, it was like the aquamarine.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's it. So, and I remember at the time, when it was first came out, I didn't actually mind it, but then I thought, oh, I don't know about changing stuff like this. I know it's the way of the world.
And I know why you're thinking of that, because there's I remember Balok, I think, played in that kit. I'm just pulling the picture up now if I can. It's probably going to be tiny on my screen. Yeah, it's going to be tiny on the screen, isn't it? But this kit,
yes.
I reckon that must have been from the Forest game, because it's that sort of aquamarine kit.
Yeah. So I remember that, thinking of all the years and all the away kits and third kits we've had. It would have been great if we could have just maybe had something a bit different. But I remember the away kit, I think, was the all white. Like, it was back to an all white kit. So I didn't mind at the start of the season seeing it. But by the end of the year, it just reminded me a little bit too much when things were going the other way, that we just looked like Leeds. Yeah,
I don't know if you can see my screen. Yeah. So that was Balok on his debut against Forest in that kit. So obviously, that was a nice game. But yeah, look, first half of the season much more pleasant to talk about than the second half of the season. So yeah, it is tough to sort of think about the fact. Yeah, so we finished the first half of that season in 8th place, beating Sheff Wednesday on New Year's Day. This flashback series, we've sort of done the 10 seasons from the 2009, 2010 season. 2010, 2011 season, all the way up to the 2019, 2020 season, which does mean that our next episode will be a bit of a downer, finishing off with arguably the worst relegation in any club's history in football. So I'll have to have a think about whether we do sort of a summary episode where we can be a bit more positive. Maybe we look at the highlights from the decade or something like that. But thank you for joining me for this one, Brad.
Yeah, no problems, mate. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. And thank you, everyone, for listening in to this episode. We will be back next week to, not much of a cheerier topic, because we'll be talking about that disappointing loss to Stoke over the weekend just gone, and looking ahead to the Burnley game the following week. But other than that, because we've got the week off now for City, so hopefully, everything goes okay. Can't get a loss if we're not playing, so I guess there's that upside. But other than that, until next time, come on, City.